Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. So I asked you guys over on my Instagram if you wanted me to do this video, and the majority of you said yes. So this is something a little bit different again for my channel, and I'm going to be doing a little review of one of my recent reads, which is A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness, I think. I'm bad with names, guys, and pronouncing things, so don't hate me if I mispronounce something in this video. But yes, I just recently finished this book along with the TV show that is based off the book, the first season. They've also been renewed for a second and a third series, so they are going to be covering all of the books in this trilogy, which is known as the All Souls trilogy. That's pretty exciting. That's pretty impressive that they've already been renewed for that many seasons and are going to be covering all the books, so the whole entire story. So I'm very excited to see where that goes. But anyway, before I get sort of into my general thoughts and opinions on both the book and the show and my ratings for both, I am going to read you guys the back cover of the book so that you have an idea of what sort of the general idea of what the story is, and I'll get a little bit more into it. But here we go. Deep in the heart of Oxford's Boldlin library, Diana Bishop, a young scholar and descendant of witches, unearths an ancient, I can never say this word on the first try, alchemical manuscript. Wanting nothing to do with sorcery, she banishes the book to the stacks, but her discovery has set a fantastical underworld stirring, and soon a horde of demons, witches, and other creatures descend upon the library. Among them is the here's another word I'm not going to be able to say on the first try, enigmatic Matthew Claremont, a vampire with a keen interest in the book, equal parts history and magic, romance and suspense. A Discovery of Witches is a memorizing and addictive tale of passion and obsession that reveals the closely guarded secrets of an enchanted world. So yes, that does pretty much sum up the book. I mean, yeah, so it does follow the main character, who is Diana. She comes from this long line, or at least a decent line, of pretty powerful witches, but herself, it's sort of that classic story that I'm sure we've all read or watched a show that deals with this sort of thing of like, oh, you know, I'm gonna push away, you know, all that part of myself, that supernatural part, to live, you know, a normal human life kind of thing. So that is definitely what Diana is doing, and part of that stems from her relationship with her own magic. It doesn't exactly work out the way that she wanted to growing up, and also something that happens to her parents, which I'm gonna try to keep the spoilers down, but I can't promise everything. So yeah, so she requests this book, it comes up and she opens it, and it's just very much laced in magic, and she doesn't know how to react, so she just puts it back. And that mistake leads to well, maybe not so much a mistake, leads to this whole big hoopla with all these people coming after her, wanting the book, wanting to know why she was able to bring it up, and sort of helping her along with that is Matthew Claremont, who is a very interesting vampire. I would say that that's definitely one of my favorite things about this book, because I am particularly pretty picky about vampire stories, just because there's just so many out there now. They all kind of rehash the same thing. It's kind of, you're lucky if you find one that's doing something kind of unique, and I do feel like this book does something interesting with the vampires. What I will say is that they're not super traditional in the sense that they're like, they don't have fangs, they can actually eat some food, and they can go out in the sun. So that's like the major plot points of that make the vampires in this book different from other ones. But yes, I would say I definitely like the book a lot in that sense. And overall, I gave this book a rating of 4 out of 5 stars on my Goodreads. And if you would like to check out my Goodreads, I will link it down below if you want to add me as a friend or see what else I've read, what I'm going to be reading next, which I will talk a little bit about what I am reading right now, in case you guys want me to do another review like this when I finish that book. But yes, like I'm invested in this series. Like for me, a 4-star rating is a decent rating for a book. I enjoyed it. I'm definitely curious to read the next one, especially since She left this book on kind of an interesting cliffhanger. I won't say specifically what it is, but think Outlander, okay? So think if you're familiar with some of the stuff of Outlander, then that should tell you what I'm talking about without specifically saying it. So I'm curious to see where that goes. I definitely think that if you like supernatural, urban fantasy, those kind of books that fall in those genres, then you probably will like this book. And especially if you like a book that isn't as dramatized as maybe some other, like I'm currently rewatching True Blood, and that is a super drama-filled mess, but it's really fun to rewatch it. But that is definitely not this. This is probably because it is, I believe, like Deborah herself, she is a historian, and so she did a lot of research and she put a lot of that in the book. So there is this really nice level of feeling very realistic. Like nothing feels too out of the realm of like realism. So that's a nice kind of refreshing feeling of sort of, this doesn't feel like it's so out of the ballpark, like maybe this could be a real situation. It's not too crazy, even with the relationship. Like some vampire and like non-vampire relationship things, they can get so what's the word I'm looking for? Just like crazy, real fast, it's like a really fast kind of like get into the relationship. This is a little bit like the connection between Diana and Matthew is definitely there in the very beginning, but they sort of take things slow. So I definitely like that. So when it comes to the show though, I did give the show, like, I would give it 3.5 stars because it wasn't bad. Like they did a very, I think I already said, like they did a pretty decent job trying to stay as true to the book as they can. But there were a few things that, let me get into it. So this following section here is going to be a bit spoilery, So if you don't want to be spoiled at all for anything from the book to the show, then I would suggest maybe stop watching here. I might add a timestamp down below in the description for where you can skip to just hear me talk about what I'm going to be reading next. But yes, let me get into some of the stuff from the show that I just did not, that bugged me. First thing is that something that she did not do in the book is that, of course, there's these characters that are like the antagonists, and they come after Diana and Matthew and cause problems. And when they do show up, it's like we didn't have really necessarily any knowledge about them before they actually show up, and then after they show up we get a little bit, like enough backstory to understand what their motivations are, what the relationship between other characters that we do know is, and that's really all we need to know. Like we don't need to know any more than that because it would be unnecessary and would just drag things out longer than need be. When it comes to the show though, they decided for whatever reason to just have quite a few scenes that were just completely dedicated to these other characters and what they were doing, like at the congregation and all that kind of stuff. And I personally did not find it very interesting because I just didn't care what those characters were doing unless they were interacting with the main characters and were, affecting them in that way. Because again, the book didn't do that. They didn't show us what all these other random characters were doing elsewhere, but they did in the show. So it's like, is it a horrible thing that they did that? Probably not for somebody who isn't familiar and hasn't read the book before, but that's why I particularly didn't like it, is because it felt so kind of random. Like they dropped it in the middle, and I'm just kind of lost. Like, who are these people again? Why should I care? Like, what is going on? They didn't exactly like weave it together in a way that made it like feel like a smoother transition from when us jumping from one thing to the next, especially in the beginning. Like the first few episodes when they started doing this, it was kind of confusing, especially since I was just starting reading the book and I hadn't met any of those characters yet, so I was even more confused. So maybe my recommendation is don't try to read the book and watch the show at the same exact time, because you'll just be very confused. So maybe start with one or the other. There's only 8 episodes in the first season too, so it's not too hard to like fly through that. What is another thing? So again, when you have vampires in something, and then especially if it's a book, and then it gets turned into a TV series, especially thanks to everything else that's come before this, like True Blood and Twilight, you're gonna have a situation where it feels like most producers and directors, if they have vampires on screen, they have to make them as drama-y as possible, even though it doesn't necessarily feel like that in the book. For example, there's a couple scenes in the beginning episodes of the show that were, they were in the book, but the difference was that in the book, they're not as over the top as they make them in the show. Like there's one particular scene in the show where she's coming back at night from rowing on the river, and she's putting away her boat, and Matthew is there, and it's just like this whole kind of drama thing where he tells her not to run away from him, and like, don't run and just get away from me, because he's like losing control or something like that. Okay, yes, he does interact with her around the boat thing, but it doesn't happen like that. It's just kind of too dramatized for my liking. Some other things that I found kind of weird decisions that they made in the show versus the book was, I don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure that Matthew's brother is not a member of the congregation, which is like the, like the evil bad guys in this situation. That he wasn't a member of that, like in the book, I don't remember them saying that in the book. So, but they definitely do it in the show. So, I don't know if that was just a decision that they made for the show so that they could have more play with the congregation, like showing that on screen. So I guess viewers can understand that. The other thing, so getting into something from the book, kind of a book situation. So of course this is an adult book, so when it comes to adult books, you expect some level of like the sexy time kind of things. Interesting enough, this book is not, like, at least like with most adult books, like you expect like one scene, especially if it has an element, like a strong element of a romance. You expect one scene where it's like things are happening, you know what I mean? There are some minor scenes in this book, but it's really not heavy on that, like, at all. And it's actually really important because Diana and Matthew, they never consummate their relationship, if you get what I mean. They do other things, but they don't do that. So, but it's really important that they don't, because of what we learn at the end of the book, in a sense. So, when it came to the show, though, I don't know, it feels like the show implied that they did go that far. I don't know, it was kind of just big question mark on that, and they don't even discuss that. Like, even at the end, because that was a point that comes up at the end of the book, and they don't even discuss it really in the show at all. Like, they have that scene, but it's like they don't explain it in the way that they do in the book, maybe because they're just saving that information to spring on us like later on, maybe. Also, another sort of on a note about their relationship, in the whole entire show, it's like there's a certain point in the book, after they decide that they're gonna be together, they're gonna stay together through all this mess and stuff, that essentially they become like husband and wife, especially in the eyes of the vampire community, and they even refer to each other as that throughout like the last few parts of the book, and they do not refer to each other at all in that way in the show. So again, I don't know if they're just saving that for some time later down the thing, but I just found that kind of an odd choice, since it's, again, it's not an insignificant, silly kind of plot point in the book that they call themselves that. There's actually an important reason that you learn about later on. It all plays together, I think. I think that's the nice thing about the book, is that all these little details, they do matter, and they do build up to something. And while some of it hasn't come completely out yet in the book, and I'm sure it will in the last two books, they didn't cover it in the show, and I don't understand why. I don't know if it was a choice, just like a cultural kind of thing, I don't know. I don't know why they didn't do it. Again, this is just me being more nitpicky. Again, like, I don't think they did a horrible job with the show, but it's just kind of odd choices that feel important to me as far as it goes for the book. They seem important, but then they didn't talk about it in the show. There's also some other points, like, again, towards the end of, like, the last few episodes of the show, that were definitely scenes from the book. Now, those were the scenes that, for some reason, they didn't, like, take as seriously as they are in the book versus when they did it in the show. Like, I found that there's a whole chapter when basically Diana, it's super important, she gets kidnapped and tortured, and she comes out of it totally, like, wrecked, both, like, physically and emotionally and mentally, and that sort of plays on through the rest of the book a little bit and comes up every now and again because it's traumatizing. And in the show, it's like, it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, she wasn't that hurt. I guess maybe they made that decision based on, you know, maybe makeup and production, you know, costs and stuff. They didn't want to go that full out, but it just, like, they just kind of, like, shortened that scene a lot more while they dramatized other things at the beginning of the show that from the book were not even that big of a deal. So again, those are some of my main things about the show that I disagree with, and is why I gave it a lesser rating than I would the book. But overall, like, I'm not mad at the job that they did in creating, you know, the TV show versus the book. Like, they did their best to stay as true to the book, and so I'll give them props for that, because there's plenty of other things out there we know that do not do that good of a job. I'm looking at you, Percy Jackson movie. Jesus. Horrible, horrible book to movie adaptation ever. So, yes, those are my rambly thoughts on this book. Again, and the show. I think they're both pretty decent. I'm definitely invested. I'll definitely continue on with it and see where it all goes. But yes, if you like supernaturally stuff, you like a little bit of romance, you like a little bit of history, a little bit of suspense, then I would definitely recommend checking out this book. It's about, how many pages? It's like up into almost the 600 pages, almost. So most of the chapters they can be kind of long, but nothing feels too unnecessary. Again, if you want sort of, it starts off with a much, like, slower pace, and then it just, like, gradually builds and builds more until you get to the end of the book with this kind of interesting cliffhanger that sets up for the next book, which I'm very curious to see what they do with that, how that plays out exactly. So, with that said, let me get into briefly what I'm reading next and tell you a little bit of why I'm reading this book next, and that is The Cruel Prince. So I basically saw this book, I found out about this book via fan art on Pinterest, and I don't know, it just caught my eye. Again, this is definitely like a fairy, kind of like fairy world story, and I've read, you know, A Court of Thorn and Roses. I really love that series, and that's kind of what this reminded me of, especially with, like, the fan art I was seeing between the two, like, main characters. It definitely felt like kind of Court of Thorn and Roses light, in a sense. Maybe a little bit darker. I don't know. Court of Thorn and Roses can be pretty dark sometimes. But I'm very curious to see how this goes. From generally, like, I put this in my Instagram stories, and most people, it seems like they either really love this book or they really hate it. So I'm very curious to see how I end up falling on that scale of things. But the fan art definitely caught my eye. Like, this sort of relationship that seems like it's going on in this book is definitely one of my favorites to read. It's kind of my guilty pleasure kind of read thing. So, yes, I'm very curious to see how that goes. But if you guys happen to have read this book before, you can give me a non-spoiler thoughts down in the comments about it. Also, if you read A Discovery of Witches, and let me know what you guys thought of this book. Do you agree with my thoughts on the show if you've watched the show? But yes, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and again, if you would like me to do a review of this book when I finish it, then I can definitely do that. Otherwise, all my other links will be down in the description, including my Patreon, which I just released that. So if you would like to hop on there and see some more sort of exclusive art-related stuff, again, I'm working on some new art videos for this channel. They just take some time to put together. So yes, thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to check out all my links down below, including Shop, Redbubble, my Instagram, all that good stuff. And I will see you in the next one. Have a great day, guys.